All right, back out at Pescadero. Kind of a misty day today, but the wind is not too bad. I've painted this scene before, but it's been over a year, and it's kind of nice to return to a familiar spot. There is a bit of color in the cliffs, which is nice because it's otherwise a pretty gray looking scene. I'll be painting on an 11 by 14 inch linen panel. I've got my usual palette of colors here, but I'm going to try to keep it limited to ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, titanium white, and cadmium yellow medium. For my brush, I'm starting with a number 3 natural bristle filbert, and I've thinned some burnt sienna with odorless mineral spirits. I'm going to try to map out the shapes really quickly, going with the horizon up at about the top quarter. And I know that I want the main cliffs to sort of be in this area roughly, so I'm just playing with shapes. There's some patterns on the sand and then some water. The tide will be coming in, which will be nice because I would like to have some water in the painting, so it's not just predominantly sand, because there's not a lot going on right here. There's some land out in the distance like this, another bit of land coming out like this with a beach that swings around and connects to the top of these cliffs in the foreground. I put the linen on this panel myself about 20 years ago, and I just found it in my studio, and I thought, oh, you know, I should play around and paint on this panel. I used acrylic matte medium to adhere the linen to the panel. It's just a masonite panel. It's 20 years later, and the linen is still stuck to the panel. Doesn't seem to be a problem. All right, so I like the big shapes, so now I'm reinforcing the shapes with darker burnt sienna. I've switched over to a natural bristle flat, and I've got a mixture here of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and a bit of titanium white. I am thinning a bit with liquid. I'm going to try to use this brush for most of the painting. It does feel a bit large for the task at hand, that's what I like. I want the brush to hold a lot of paint, which allows me to paint quickly, but also I want there to be a little bit of chaos in this painting, or a little bit of messiness. Trying to work quickly as well, and that will also keep me from being too careful. For this distant land, I've added titanium white and ultramarine blue to the mix. I can tell that this mix is a bit too dark in value, but that's all right. I can lighten it. Just want to establish the shapes. I do like returning to familiar spots and experimenting with variations on compositions that I've painted before. It's also nice to return to a spot and see how you've grown as a painter, because you'll never paint the same place the same twice. For the cliffs, I've got a mixture of alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, and a bit of cadmium yellow medium, and also a touch of titanium white. And the sun is coming out, so I've got a decision to make. I can continue painting this painting as a gray day painting, or I can embrace the sunlight. Got a mixture here of titanium white and ultramarine blue for the water. This mix is also a bit too dark. Again, that's all right. I can lighten it up. It's a lot easier to lighten paint that you've already laid down than it is to darken it. Still keeping the paint thin. I do want to have areas of transparency if possible. And there's more water in here. Sometimes I'll leave areas unpainted to suggest white water. I have not done that today, just because I'm not sure where I want the white water. This rock right here is reflected in the wet sand. I do want to include that because it does help to make the sand appear to be wet. Got a warm gray here for the rocks at the base of the cliffs. And this is just a gray I picked up off my palette. For the sand, I've got a mixture of burnt sienna, titanium white, cadmium yellow medium, and a bit of alizarin crimson. This mix was not going in the right direction, but I know from experience that often the color I'm looking for is red. And once I added the alizarin crimson, it came together, so to speak. And there's some darker sand closer to the water. Got a light value blue-gray here for the wet sand. It is reflecting the sky. And I want to make sure that the value of the wet sand is dark enough that the white water stands out against it. I will be adjusting the values quite a bit, but I'm trying to get as close as possible. I got pure titanium white here, just playing around with some of the white water patterns. And the values and colors out here are changing dramatically by the minute. Because the light is changing. It's gotten foggy again. That's all right. A lot of people find it frustrating painting plein air because of the changing conditions, but I feel like the results I get when plein air painting are much better than when I paint in the studio. In particular when painting landscapes and seascapes. Plus, my favorite place to be when painting is outdoors. I've mentioned before, I have a studio at home. I have not painted in my studio for over 2 years. I mixed up a green here using ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow medium, and a bit of burnt sienna. So far, I have only used 4 colors and titanium white on this painting, and I do not feel limited at all. As I've mentioned before, a limited palette can be great for color harmony. Got a light purplish mix for the sky. This looks to be a bit too saturated. Not a problem. You may be wondering what these little dark marks on the edges are. I used to compose using a viewfinder that had marks on the edge of it, and I would try to hold the viewfinder really carefully and then, I don't know, use these marks as reference. I don't do that anymore because I'm not trying to accurately reproduce what I see. In other words, I'm not like trying to take a picture of what I see. I'm using the scene as inspiration, as I've talked about. And I'm changing shapes, moving things around. So I no longer use a viewfinder or a view catcher. I won't say I never do. Sometimes it can be helpful to look through a viewfinder or a view catcher to simplify the scene and give you an idea. And when you're starting out, I think it's actually a great thing to do. But eventually, I just got to the point where I didn't feel like I needed it anymore. Whatever works for you is what you should do. There is no right or wrong way to do this. So the blocking is complete. At this point, I step back about 10 feet and look at the big shapes, try to decide if there's anything I want to change. I do feel like I want these rocks in the foreground to be a little more pronounced. Maybe have the bottoms of them come down just a bit. I do take my time making sure that the composition works, but after that, then I can speed up the process and apply the paint quickly. It is difficult to film this portion, but I'll do my best to include as much of this part of the painting as possible. And I'm looking for a line here between these two. So this one needs to come down a little bit. A bit of dark in here as well. I'm darkening up the cliffs here. I am going to try to push the saturation in the darks, because when I get this painting indoors, the darks will seem less saturated and they will seem darker as well. It's something to keep in mind when you're plein air painting. Even when it's overcast, it is very bright outdoors. The colors will seem less saturated and darker when you get the painting indoors. As you guys may know, I mostly paint on gessoed panels, and it's kind of a challenge actually painting on the linen. There are some things that I think work better. It's easier to get soft edges, but it is more difficult to get a hard edge actually. I am enjoying painting on this surface. I'm making strokes with intention. If you make confident strokes, your painting will look more confident. I am working from dark to light and refining the colors. That's all I'm doing. And I'm trying not to overthink. I'm trying to be spontaneous and trust my instincts. I am stepping back from my painting every few minutes to look at the value relationships, and I'm seeing that the sand needs to be lighter in value, and also the sky needs to be lighter in value as well. That horizon's a bit too dark. So notice the value difference between the cliffs and the water in the background. I need to lighten up the background quite a bit. There appears to be a bit more saturation in the water in the foreground here. Oftentimes when we first start out using a limited palette and we're struggling to mix a certain color, we might be tempted to blame it on the palette, but what I find is that oftentimes it's my own ability to actually see the color or determine the color I'm trying to mix. That's usually the problem. It's not the palette. It is my own inability to judge the color accurately and then mix the color accurately. And like anything in life, you can only solve the problem once you've identified it. So once I did identify that that was happening in my paintings, I just was more careful in mixing my colors and more honest with myself when I didn't have the mix I was after. Alright, so here's what I finished up with. This painting took about an hour and a half to complete. It was finished on site. However, I'm contemplating a few changes, mainly in the rocks in this area right here. I might try to break up this arc here a little bit. I really did enjoy painting on linen. It was nice having the texture of the canvas to help create some soft edges. Although having said that, I think some of the edges along the waterline here could have been softened a bit more. But that's something that I can do afterwards as well. There was quite a bit of moisture in the atmosphere, so I did want to create a sense of depth using atmospheric perspective. So I lightened up the distant land in order to push it back. And something I've mentioned in previous videos is that you often have to lighten up distant objects more than you think. So I had already lightened up these distant cliffs, and then I thought, you know what, I better lighten them up a bit more. And they do not look too light at all. I probably could have lightened them up even a touch more. Even though I was using a limited palette, I did not feel limited at all in the colors that I was mixing. In fact, I could have done without burnt sienna, because I do prefer mixing oranges using alizarin crimson and cadmium yellow medium and then graying it down with ultramarine. If it was a sunny day, I would have added phthalo blue to the palette, just because I feel like the phthalo is really a valuable color in creating blue-greens in the ocean. It also helps to create a feeling light in the sky. But on a gray day like this, I could get by with alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and cadmium yellow medium, and that's it. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. It's the Patreon support that helps keep me making these videos, and it's much appreciated. There's also a PayPal tip jar down below, so check it out. Other than that, stay creative. I'll see you guys in the next video.